This is TWiT. I can see, and I think, with the population we have and with the food problems we have, the idea of synthetic meat would solve a lot of problems. Meat is a very expensive thing to produce environmentally. But there's a big problem with this, and that is there is a strong anti-genetically modified organism movement. Look how people act about GMOs. And you have the story in here of golden rice, which is a really good example of this. Would you tell that story?
Sure. It's really an awful, heart-wrenching story that begins with a scientist whose parents escaped the Holocaust. And he knew, he went through incredible suffering as a child and becomes a scientist and decides at some point that he sees malnutrition everywhere and wants to figure out some way to contribute. So this is where the story begins. And he decides after a couple of fits and starts to settle on rice. This is in part because more people eat rice on this planet than just about anything else. And because at the end of his life, Confucius became a foodie, which is like the weirdest thing. Confucius became a super foodie towards the end.
This I did not know.
And wrote in his memoirs effectively that the freshest vegetables, the broccoli, the green of the broccoli looks best set against the absolute white of rice. And so basically what this led to was a boom temporarily, and everybody taking all the hull and all the other nutritious parts of the rice off of the rice to just leave behind the starchy interior. And that's kind of what we eat now.
Yeah.
So the problem is that that's filling, but it's not nutritious
all the
really
nutrition
at all.
is stripped off.
Right. So what he thought was, is there a way that we could engineer a different rice? And what other nutrients could we pack into that rice? And at some point, they figure out how to stuff in a version of beta carotene, which would at least add beta carotene, vitamin A, vitamin K, some other nutrients in. Now, it's not going to be a magic bullet, but something is better than nothing. They go through this entire process. And by the way, it turns out if you have those deficiencies, you wind up with significant eye problems.
Mm-hmm.
I actually quote my husband in the book because he's an eye doctor, as you know. And he calls it, when you have that type of deficiency, they call it religion-altering pain because you will pray to any god to make it go away. And it affects children. So they figure out how to make rice that has extra nutrients in it by engineering it in a different way. Everybody's very excited about this. And then it turns out that they, throughout all of this research, had to use a whole bunch of different processes that had patents on them. This is one of the central themes of the books and one of the huge problems that's pervasive throughout all of tech, including biotech, and that's who owns the intellectual property. In this case, there were 70 different patents. And so once they got their proof of concept together, they realized it's there's no way to give and they wanted to give it away. So they weren't going to sell it. They were just going to give the rice away, but it would have been in violation of everybody's patents. So they wind up with a company that says, listen, big pharma company, we will make the lawyer problems go away in exchange for you allowing us to market and brand the rice and, have it be part of what we're building. Reluctantly, they say yes, which was probably a big mistake. They should have just been patient and tried to find another alternative. But this is what set Greenpeace and other activist groups off, because what they thought would happen would be that initially these farmers would get the rice, they would farm the rice, and then they would become dependent on the big pharma and the big ag companies. That's not what was likely to happen, but these stories and this misinformation, it circles around quickly. And at the end, they finally had a crop that was being piloted, it was being tested, and a bunch of people showed up on the day that they were going to harvest it for a protest. They stomped down and killed the whole crop. And it turns out it wasn't local farmers in the Philippines where this was happening. It was protesters who had been hired and flown in. I completely understand people's concerns when it comes to genetically modified organisms. I partially blame terrible information campaigns around the bovine encephalitis, mad cow disease thing that was happening, whatever that was, 20 years ago, and the way that Dolly the sheep was handled. So I understand that people are absolutely concerned, and there have been problems in the agricultural sector. But, you know, the truth is that most things we consume today or that we are wearing today have been modified to some degree. So we have to make room for change. And the problem is that, you know, misinformation is just escalating and moving so fast at this point that, you know, I worry about what the future might look like as a result.
It's very much like AI. When you say AI, people have that same reaction because of many science fiction films. When you say genetically modified, people have the same reaction. But ultimately, yeah,
and actually, you made me think of something. I'm sorry to interrupt. But you mentioned White Castle. Yeah. I do. I love White Castle. It's like the only fast food that I like. And I love it. I grew up in the Midwest and anyways. So like, yeah, I will shove my face full of sliders. And not just sliders. I also like the chicken rings. Picture an onion ring, but it's made out of chicken. That is not a natural shape.
There's no chicken with rings.
All day long. No. Not a chicken wing, a chicken ring. Right. Okay. So why, here's the question. Why are we okay? Yeah, but like, why are we okay eating that?
It's not logical.
It's totally logical. It's just different. And it's like people will eat chicken rings, but a chicken grown in controlled conditions from a stem cell line from a chicken that's never been modified in any way, like that somehow is like crosses a line.
But and the reason I asked you to tell you the golden rice story is it is in a nutshell the whole problem in many different ways. You know, the ideas of patents around this stuff, the natural fears people have around this stuff. Did golden rice eventually, it is now being eaten, right?
So the last that I read was that I think about a month ago or so, they finally have a crop that they think is going to be ready. But this story is like 20 years old.
Yeah. And it could have saved millions of lives and untold suffering.